It was the discovery of a receipt for a diamond bracelet I never received that cracked the carefully constructed facade of my life. For 22 years of marriage, I had never once questioned James, his late nights, his business trips, or the lingering scent of perfume on his collar, which he always explained away as the work of his assistant. I trusted him completely, and therein lay my first mistake. Before we delve deeper, I want you to reflect. Where are you tuning in from? Does this story resonate with you? If it does, I invite you to subscribe, because tomorrow I have something extra special just for you. I first met James Reynolds when I was 24, working as an executive assistant at Meridian Financial. He was already 32, ambitious, and had already begun making waves in the investment world. I remember the first time he walked into our office, his tailored navy suit, his confident stride, that smile that seemed reserved just for me. In a matter of weeks, we were dating, and within a year, we were married. In my heart, I thought I had found the one, the kind of love that you read about in fairy tales. My name is Rebecca Mitchell. I grew up in a small town in Connecticut, where most people lived simple lives and knew each other's business all too well. My parents were educators, Dad, the beloved football coach, and Mom, an English literature teacher. They instilled in me the belief that honesty was the bedrock of every meaningful relationship, and that hard work would always be rewarded. I carried these values into adulthood, into my marriage, and into the life James and I built together. And perhaps, just perhaps, that is why the betrayal cut so deeply. In the early days of our marriage, James and I lived in a small one-bedroom apartment in Boston. I would wake up early, preparing his favorite breakfast, black coffee and avocado toast with a sprinkle of red pepper flakes, before heading off to my own job. At night, I would listen intently as he talked about the challenges at work, offering whatever support I could. When he told me he wanted to start his own investment firm, I didn't hesitate to contribute my savings of $42,000, money I had carefully saved since my first job at 16. I told him, "It's not my money anymore, it's ours, our future." Reynolds Capital Management opened its doors in 2003, and I left my job to become the firm's office manager, working side by side with James as he built his client base and reputation. Those early years were grueling. 16-hour days blended into 18, and weekends disappeared into client meetings and portfolio reviews. Our dream of starting a family was perpetually delayed. Next year, or when things settled down. The sacrifice seemed worth it. After all, we were building something together. By our 10th anniversary, Reynolds Capital managed over $200 million in assets. We moved from our cramped apartment to a stunning colonial in Wellesley, overlooking a serene lake. For my birthday, James surprised me with a Mercedes SUV wrapped in a giant red bow. We went on our first real vacation, 2 weeks on the Greek islands, where during a sunset in Santorini, he slipped a 3-carat diamond ring onto my finger, replacing my modest engagement ring. "For putting up with me all these years," he said, and I smiled, thinking that, from the outside, we had achieved the American dream. But with success came subtle shifts in our dynamic. As James's professional stature grew, I found myself increasingly defined not as Rebecca Mitchell, but as James Reynolds' wife. At firm events, clients would pat my hand and say things like, "Behind every great man is a great woman," or "You must be so proud of him." And, of course, I was proud. But somewhere deep inside, I began to feel a quiet whisper. I deserved recognition for my own contributions. I had managed the office operations, hired and trained staff, organized client appreciation events, and even helped develop the firm's branding and marketing materials. Yet, in the public narrative, I was nothing more than a supporting character in James's success story. When James suggested I step back from the firm to enjoy the fruits of our labor, I reluctantly agreed. "You've earned a break," he insisted. Besides, the new COO needs to establish his authority without the founder's wife looking over his shoulder. So, at 41, I found myself in a beautiful home, financially secure, but with days that stretched ahead of me, blank and unsettling. I joined the country club, took up tennis, and threw myself into charity work. I redecorated our home, then redecorated it again. I hosted dinner parties where James's clients discussed market trends, while their wives compared notes on interior designers and private schools. Sometimes, while observing these gatherings from across the room, I would catch a glimpse of myself in the mirror and wonder, when did I become this person, this ornamental fixture in someone else's life? By our 15th anniversary, James's travel schedule had intensified. Chicago 1 week, San Francisco the next, followed by New York, Los Angeles, Seattle. And so my journey began to take an unexpected turn, one that would make me question not only the life I had built, but also the person I had become. The constant rotation of cities, each one a supposed destination for meetings with potential clients or financial conferences, became the rhythm of our lives. Expansion, James explained. We need to establish ourselves nationally. I accepted this explanation, believing it was simply the next logical step for the business. As our time together dwindled to brief weeknight dinners and occasional weekends, I found myself managing our home with military precision, maximizing whatever moments we could share. I memorized his schedule, anticipating his needs before he even voiced them. His favorite meals were prepared on cue. When he returned from his trips, I made sure his shirts were pressed, just as he liked. I had become the epitome of the corporate wife, existing primarily to facilitate his success and comfort. And when loneliness crept in, I reminded myself that partnerships require sacrifice. This, I told myself, was simply my season to give more. But as the months passed, I began noticing small discrepancies. Things that seemed too insignificant at first to question. James mentioned a conference in Dallas, yet his airline itinerary, sent to our shared account, showed a flight to Denver. A credit card statement listed a restaurant in Nashville, even though he was supposedly in Phoenix. Each time I questioned him, he waved my concerns away with plausible explanations. Last-minute meeting changes, quick side trips to meet a client, billing statements that crossed cycles. I chose to believe him because in that moment, the alternative was too painful to consider. I had always trusted him, and I had surrendered the responsibility of managing our finances years ago. We had separate credit cards for convenience, and I never questioned why my online access was limited to my own cards. After all, I had unrestricted use of my Platinum Amex, and money was never an issue. Why would I need to scrutinize statements or balances? Then came our 22nd anniversary last December. We had planned a weekend at our favorite Vermont ski lodge, but just 2 days before, James called. He needed to fly to Miami for an emergency meeting with a client whose portfolio was underperforming. "I'm devastated," he said, sounding truly upset. "But this account is worth millions. I'll make it up to you, I promise." Disappointed but understanding, I canceled our reservation that evening. Restless in our empty house, I decided to organize James's home office, a gesture I thought he would appreciate. As I sorted through papers, I stumbled upon a receipt tucked into a folder. Cartier, a platinum and diamond bracelet worth $18,500, purchased just 3 days earlier. And there it was, a note. "To my darling Emily, who makes life worth living forever, yours, J." Time seemed to freeze as I stood there, the receipt trembling in my hand. Emily, who was Emily? And why was my husband buying her an anniversary-worthy gift? The bracelet wasn't for me. James had given me a spa package and a weekend getaway, now canceled, for our anniversary. My mind raced, searching for an explanation that wouldn't shatter my world. Could it have been a client gift? Too personal. His assistant, perhaps, though that felt wildly inappropriate. A relative? We had no family members named Emily. In that moment, I knew I should confront him. I should have called him immediately, demanded answers. After all, the Rebecca of 20 years ago, the woman who believed in honesty and directness, would have done just that. But 2 decades of subtle conditioning had transformed me. Instead of righteous anger, I felt a paralyzing fear. What if he left me? What would become of me? Who was I without James Reynolds? I carefully returned the receipt to its hiding place and retreated to our bedroom, the weight of the discovery pressing down on me. That night I barely slept. My thoughts spun between denial, suspicion, and dread. By morning, I had made a decision that surprised even me. I would say nothing, not yet. First, I needed to understand what I was facing. The next week passed in a blur of secret investigation. While James was in Miami, I used his laptop, which he had left behind, to access his emails. His password, our anniversary date followed by my birth date, offered no challenge. What I found confirmed my worst fears and revealed something even more devastating. James's affair with Emily wasn't a recent development. It had been ongoing for nearly 7 years. Emily Wright was a former client who had invested with Reynolds Capital after inheriting money from her grandmother. According to their emails, they had met during a consultation, and James had pursued her aggressively. She was 14 years his junior, younger than me by nearly 2 decades, beautiful. Based on the photos they had exchanged, she appeared to be the mother of his 6-year-old son. That discovery, the child's existence, hit me like a physical blow. After years of postponing our own dream of starting a family for the sake of the business, James had created one with someone else. The betrayal was not only emotional, it was deeply existential. My mind couldn't grasp the magnitude of it. The life I had built, the dreams I had sacrificed, now seemed utterly shattered. But here's the thing. In this moment of betrayal, I was given the opportunity to redefine my life. What happens when the carefully curated narrative of your life comes crashing down? You must rebuild. It is in these moments of profound disruption that the seeds of transformation are sown. I didn't know it then, but this was the beginning of a journey back to myself. A journey that would force me to face my fears, challenge my assumptions, and ultimately discover a strength within me I had never known. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The boy named Christopher James Wright had his father's eyes and dimpled smile. In one photo, they were building a sandcastle on a beach. I recognized from our own vacation 3 years earlier, family time with my boys. Emily had captioned it, unaware that her lover was married, that he had another home, another life. Further digging revealed, James had purchased a luxury condo in Back Bay for Emily and their son. He spent at least 2 weekends a month with them, plus many of the business trips that had become increasingly frequent. He attended school events, doctor appointments, and family gatherings with Emily's parents, who apparently believed James was a divorced businessman who traveled frequently for work. As I pieced together this parallel life my husband had constructed, I discovered something else. Something that transformed my shock and grief into cold, calculated resolve. James had been moving substantial assets out of our joint holdings and into private accounts and investments. Property purchased in single-member LLCs, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, investment portfolios I had never known existed by my amateur calculations. He had diverted over $4 million in the past 5 years alone. This wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage vows, it was financial infidelity on a massive scale, a systematic dismantling of our shared resources, in preparation for what abandoning me when Christopher started school full-time. When I became too old, too inconvenient for his preferred lifestyle, the thought made my blood run cold. When James returned from his trip, I greeted him with a warm smile in his favorite whiskey. Sour, listening attentively as he described productive meetings with multiple clients in Miami. I noticed details I had previously overlooked, how he carefully avoided specifics, how he redirected questions about his trip to questions about my week. I played my part perfectly, the adoring wife who never suspected a thing. That night as James slept beside me, I made a decision that would alter the course of both our lives. I would not confront him, not yet. I would not cry or beg or rage. Instead, I would take a page from his book. I would become the student of deception, learning from the master himself. And when the time was right, I would reclaim everything he had tried to take from me: my security, my dignity, my future. The next morning, I called Patricia Winters, a college friend who had become one of Boston's most ruthless divorce attorneys. We met for lunch at a restaurant 40 miles from Wellesley, where no one would recognize us. I laid out what I knew and what I suspected. Patricia listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly grim. "Rebecca," she said, "finally what James has done, creating a separate family hiding assets. It's not just cruel, it's potentially criminal. But proving it won't be easy, especially if he's been careful. We'll need an evidence, documented, proof of the hidden accounts, records of transfers, and we'll need to move carefully. If he suspects, he'll accelerate whatever exit strategy he's already put in motion." She outlined a plan so methodical, so strategic, that it both frightened and impressed me. "From this moment forward," she instructed, "you're an actress giving the performance of your lifetime. Your stage is your marriage, and your audience is James. One wrong line, one missed cue, and you could lose everything." I spent the next month in careful reconnaissance, documenting everything I could access without raising suspicions. I photographed documents in James's office when he was traveling. I noted account numbers from mail before passing it to him, unopened. I installed a small voice-activated recorder in his home office. "Legally questionable," Patricia warned, "but potentially valuable for confirming what we already suspected during this time." I maintained our normal routine, with meticulous attention to detail. I prepared his favorite meals, inquired about his work, and even initiated intimacy on our usual schedule, all while feeling as though I was moving through life behind glass, observing myself perform these acts from a distance. The performance was exhausting but necessary. James noticed nothing amiss, or if he did, he attributed any changes to normal marital evolution. He continued his pattern home, for 2 weeks away for one weekend. An occasional midweek overnight conference that always seemed to fall on nights when Emily posted pictures of romantic dinners on her Instagram account, which I now followed using a fake profile. While James orchestrated his double life, I assembled a team. Patricia, as legal counsel, a forensic accountant recommended by her firm, and Martin Chen, a private investigator with particular expertise in financial matters. Together, they helped me uncover the full extent of James's financial deception. The picture that emerged was both clearer and darker than I had initially suspected beyond the condo for Emily and the regular transfers to support his second family. James had been systematically preparing for a clean break from our marriage. He had established a complex network of shell companies and investments designed to shield assets from divorce proceedings. He had purchased property in California, where he had no business connections, but where Emily had family, most alarmingly. He had recently consulted with a divorce attorney known for representing high-net-worth clients in contentious separations. "He's planning to leave you within the year," Martin concluded after presenting his findings. "Probably after transferring as much as possible beyond your reach based on current patterns. I'd estimate his timeline at 6 to 8 months. Patricia laid out my options. We could confront James immediately with what we knew, but that would likely trigger a defensive response and potentially a hasty divorce filing before we had fully traced all the hidden assets. Alternatively, we could continue gathering evidence while developing a counter-strategy. There's a third option," she said, lowering her voice, though we were alone in her office. "Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state, not community property. If you file for divorce, the court will attempt to divide marital assets fairly, but not necessarily equally. Given James's deception and the existence of his second family, you'd likely receive a favorable judgment, but he's hidden assets, so skillfully that favorable might still mean much less than you deserve." She leaned forward. However, there's nothing illegal about transferring joint assets into your name alone before filing for divorce, provided you disclose those transfers during proceedings. It's aggressive, yes, but so is maintaining a secret family for 7 years while siphoning away marital funds. The strategy she outlined was breathtaking in its audacity, using the documentation we had gathered and leveraging the power of attorney James had given me years ago, ironically, to make business operations smoother. When he traveled, we could systematically transfer assets back into joint control and then into my name exclusively. We could liquidate investments, redirect partnership distributions, and essentially reverse engineer the very strategy James had been employing against me. Won't this look vindictive to a judge? I asked. It would if you were hiding it, Patricia explained, but we'll document everything meticulously. When the time comes, we'll present it as a protective measure taken upon discovering his deception, not as revenge. The key is executing it completely before he realizes what's happening. The plan required precise timing and perfect execution. Any mistake, any premature discovery by James could derail everything for it to work. I needed to continue my performance as the oblivious, devoted wife while systematically dismantling the financial structure of our marriage. I spent another sleepless night considering the implications. This approach wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming power in a relationship where the balance had shifted imperceptibly over decades until I found myself. It was about creating consequences for betrayal. It was about survival. By morning, my decision was made. I called Patricia and simply said, "Let's proceed." What followed were the most challenging 3 months of my life. By day, I maintained my role as James Reynolds's supportive wife, smiling through charity functions and dinner parties, asking about his business trips, and never once revealing that I knew about Emily, about Christopher, about the millions he had hidden away by night or whenever James was with his other family. I worked with Patricia Martin and our forensic accountant to execute our strategy. We moved methodically, transferring assets in a sequence designed to minimize red flags in any single transaction. Investment accounts were closed and reopened in my name. Real estate holdings were refinanced with me as sole owner. Business distributions were redirected to new accounts. The process was complicated by James's careful compartmentalization, but he had made one critical mistake, underestimating me. He saw what he expected to see: a decorative, accommodating wife who understood little about finance and cared less. He never imagined I could comprehend, let alone unravel his financial maneuvers. As weeks passed, I noticed subtle changes in myself. I stood straighter. I spoke more confidently. I began making decisions without seeking James's approval. Small things at first, like redecorating the guest room or planning a weekend with friends. He noticed these changes, but seemed pleased rather than concerned, interpreting my newfound independence as personal growth rather than liberation from his influence. "You seem differently lately," he remarked one evening as we prepared for a charity gala. "More vibrant." I smiled, adjusting his bow tie with steady hands. "Do I? I've just been focusing on self-improvement. You're always saying we should invest in ourselves." He laughed and kissed my cheek. "Well, it's working. You're glowing." If only he knew the source of that glow. The quiet satisfaction of reclaiming what was rightfully mine. Piece by methodical piece. The knowledge that even as he planned his exit, I was ensuring it wouldn't happen on his terms. By the end of February, we had successfully transferred or secured nearly 80% of our traceable marital assets. The remaining portions were either too complex to access quickly or deliberately left untouched to avoid triggering suspicion. Patricia advised that we had reached the optimal moment. We had recovered enough to ensure my financial security while leaving James sufficient resources that he would have something to lose in a protracted legal battle. "It's time," she said during our final planning meeting. "The longer we wait, the greater the risk he discovers what we've done." We set the date for March 15th. a Thursday when James would typically be home between trips. Patricia prepared the divorce filing complete with detailed documentation of James's second family and financial deceptions. Martin ensured we had backup copies of all evidence stored securely. I made arrangements to stay with friends immediately after the confrontation, anticipating James's reaction would make the house temporarily uninhabitable. As the day approached, I experienced an unexpected emotional shift. The pain and shock of discovery had gradually transformed into something more complex. Not forgiveness, certainly, but a kind of detached clarity. I saw James now not as the love of my life, who had betrayed me, as a deeply flawed man who had made choices that would ultimately cost him dearly. On the morning of March 15th, I woke before dawn and lay watching James sleep beside me. For a moment, I allowed myself to remember the young couple. We had once been full of dreams and genuine affection. I thought about the parallel lives we had led for years, him building a secret family, while I maintained the illusion of our perfect marriage. I considered the woman I had become through this ordeal, stronger, more self-reliant, unwilling to accept betrayal as my fate. James stirred, opening his eyes to find me watching him. "Good morning," he murmured, reaching for me. "Why are you up so early?" I smiled. A real smile. Perhaps my first in months, just thinking about how much everything can change in a single day. He had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be that evening. I prepared James's favorite meal, filet mignon with truffle butter, roasted asparagus, and the expensive Bordeaux he reserved for special occasions. I wore the sapphire dress he had complimented numerous times, styled my hair the way he preferred, and set the dining room with our finest china. To anyone observing it would appear I was celebrating an anniversary or milestone. In a way, I was the end of deception and the beginning of truth. James arrived home at precisely 6:30. His punctuality, a stark contrast to the chaos he was about to encounter. He noticed the elaborate dinner setup immediately, his expression shifting from surprise to pleased curiosity. "What's the occasion?" he asked, loosening his tie and kissing my cheek. Perfunctorily, "Do I need an occasion to appreciate my husband?" I replied, pouring him a glass of wine with steady hands. Dinner proceeded with rehearsed normalcy. James discussed market fluctuations and a potential new client, while I nodded attentively, asking appropriate questions at carefully timed intervals. Anyone witnessing our exchange would have seen nothing unusual. Just another evening in the life of a successful financial advisor and his accommodating wife. As I served the chocolate souffle I had painstakingly prepared, James reached across the table to take my hand. "This has been wonderful, Rebecca. I've been so busy lately. I'm sorry if I've been distant." The sincerity in his voice nearly broke my composure. Even now, knowing everything, part of me wanted to believe he meant it, that somewhere beneath the elaborate deception remained fragments of the man I had loved. I squeezed his hand gently, savoring the connection. "One final time, James," I said softly. "There's something I need to show you." From beside my chair, I retrieved the leather portfolio I had prepared with Patricia. I opened it deliberately, extracting a photograph of James, Emily, and Christopher at the boys' recent birthday party, an image Martin had obtained during his investigation. I placed it on the table between us, saying nothing. James froze wine glass halfway to his lips. His face cycled through expressions rapidly: confusion, shock, denial, and finally a cold calculation that confirmed everything I had discovered about his character. "Where did you get this?" he asked, voice low and controlled. "Does it matter?" I responded, maintaining the calm demeanor. "Patricia had coached me to project what matters is what it shows. Rebecca, I can explain." "I'm sure you can," I interrupted, surprising us both with my directness. "You've had 7 years to perfect that explanation." After all, his eyes widened, almost imperceptibly confirmation that my timeline was accurate. I continued before he could formulate a response, extracting more photographs from the portfolio. James entering Emily's condo, the building. James and Christopher at a Red Sox game. James with Emily at a restaurant during a supposed business trip to Chicago. 7 years. I repeated a son who bears your name. A condo in Back Bay, purchased through Reynolds Capital Holdings, LLC. And our entity you created specifically to hide assets from your wife, James. Facade cracked, then his carefully maintained control, giving way to defensive anger. You had me investigated. You invaded my privacy, Christ. Rebecca, what gives you the right? The absurdity of his indignation might have been comical under different circumstances. I arched an eyebrow, allowing the silence to stretch between us. 22 years of marriage gives me that right? I finally replied. My investment in your business gives me that right? The fact that you've been systematically transferring marital assets into private accounts while building a second family certainly gives me that, right? I removed the final document from the portfolio, a comprehensive spreadsheet detailing every hidden account, every undisclosed investment, every financial transaction James had concealed over the years. The forensic accountant had color-coded it for clarity. The red entries representing funds diverted to support Emily and Christopher. The blue indicating assets moved offshore. The green showing investments made solely in James's name. For the first time in our marriage, I watched James Reynolds completely lose his composure. His face paled, then flushed, deep crimson. The veneer of the charming, confident investment advisor vanished, replaced by the cornered expression of a man whose carefully constructed house of cards was collapsing. How did you, he began, then stopped, visibly recalculating his approach. Rebecca, this isn't what it looks like. Yes, I made some mistakes. Yes, there's a situation with Emily. These financial movements were for tax purposes, investment diversification. I was protecting our assets, not hiding them. I almost admired his attempt to pivot, to reframe his betrayal as prudent financial planning. It was the same persuasive technique I had watched him use with hesitant clients for decades. James, I said quietly, please don't insult my intelligence. Not anymore. I reached into my purse and removed the familiar turquoise envelope of Tiffany & Co., the same one that had contained the bracelet receipt that started my investigation. Inside now was a different document, my divorce petition prepared by Patricia and filed with the Suffolk County Probate and Family Court that morning. I'm not angry anymore, I told him, surprised to discover it was true. I'm not even hurt, not the way I was initially. What I am is resolved. Our marriage is over. It has been for years. I just didn't know it. James stared at the divorce papers, his tactical mind clearly racing to assess damage and formulate countermeasures. When he finally spoke, his voice had regained its professional smoothness, though an undercurrent of tension remained. All right, Rebecca, if this is what you want, we can handle it civilly. I'll have my attorney contact yours and we'll work out a fair settlement. He emphasized the word fair, slightly conveying his intent to control the financial terms of our separation. I allowed myself a small smile. Actually, James, there's something else you should know from the portfolio. I produced the final document, a comprehensive accounting of all the assets I had transferred into my name over the preceding months, property deeds, investment account statements, business interest certificates, all now bearing only my name. Where once they had been joint or solely, James's expression shifted from confidence to confusion, then to dawning horror as he processed what he was seeing. He grabbed the papers, flipping through them frantically. What have you done? He whispered, voice tight with fury. This is theft. This is ironic. I supplied, I believe the technical term is equitable self-help. Everything I've transferred was joint marital property or property acquired with marital funds. I've simply rebalanced our portfolio. You might say he slammed his fist on the table, causing the wine glasses to shudder precariously. You can't do this. It's illegal. I'll have it reversed immediately. You certainly can try, I acknowledged, but my attorneys advised that while the court may require some adjustments during divorce proceedings, the fundamental transfers are likely to stand. especially given your documented pattern of financial infidelity and support of a second household with marital funds. James pushed back from the table abruptly, pacing the dining room like a caged predator. I had never seen him so completely undone, so stripped of his careful control. It was both unsettling and strangely vindicating to witness. "How long have you known?" he finally asked, pausing behind his chair, knuckles white, as he gripped the upholstery. "About Emily and Christopher. 3 months. About your financial deceptions. Almost as long. I've been quite busy since then." He shook his head slowly, a reluctant appreciation crossing his features. "I never thought you had this in you. This calculation I learned from the best." I replied simply. I met across the dining room, two strangers assessing each other after decades of intimacy in his gaze. I recognized not the passionate young man who had courted me, nor the determined entrepreneur who had built a business, but a tactician evaluating battlefield losses and plotting his next move. "You won't get away with this," he said, voice low and threaded with menace. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." I stood gathering the documents with deliberate calm. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with, James. That's why I've prepared so thoroughly." As if on cue, the doorbell rang. James glanced toward the entryway, momentarily disoriented by the interruption. "That will be Martin Chen," I explained, moving toward the door, "the private investigator who's been documenting your activities. He'll be staying here tonight while I relocate temporarily. A precaution my attorneys recommended, given the nature of our conversation." James's expression hardened. "You're bringing a stranger into our home. You don't trust me, would you?" In my position, I opened the door to reveal Martin, a slight, unassuming man whose forgettable appearance belied his exceptional observational skills. He nodded politely to James before positioning himself discreetly in the hallway. "I'll collect my things now," I announced, heading toward the stairs. "Everything else will be handled through our respective attorneys." James followed me into the bedroom, watching silently as I retreated. His contained anger was palpable, filling the room like an electrical charge before a storm. "Emily was never supposed to be permanent," he said abruptly as I zipped the final bag. "It was just, she got pregnant, and I couldn't walk away. But I never planned to leave you." I paused, absorbing the breathtaking selfishness of his statement. "So you intended to maintain both households indefinitely, both families, both lives." He spread his hands in a gesture that might have appeared helpless if I hadn't known him better. "I cared about you both. Is that so difficult to understand?" "What's difficult to understand?" I replied, lifting my suitcase from the bed. "Is how I ever believed you cared about anyone but yourself." His expression darkened. "You had a good life with me, Rebecca. Designer clothes, luxury cars, vacations. Most people only dream about. I gave you everything. Everything except honesty. Everything except fidelity. Everything except the family we always said we would have. Someday." I moved toward the door, then paused, turning back. "You know what's truly ironic, James? If you had simply told me years ago that you'd fallen in love with someone else, I might have set you free. We could have ended things honorably. Instead, you chose this elaborate deception, and now you've lost everything." He laughed sharply, the sound harsh and unfamiliar. "Lost everything, hardly. You may have been clever enough to transfer some assets, but I still have my reputation, my clients, my expertise. I'll recover financially within years, maybe months." I smiled, then a genuine smile, born of certainty rather than malice. "Will you, once the SEC reviews the documentation I've provided regarding certain creative accounting practices you've employed for select clients?" The color drained from his face. "You wouldn't. I already have." I confirmed the evidence was too compelling to ignore. Ethically speaking, I had no choice but to report it. This was my final card. The discovery Martin had made, almost accidentally, while investigating James's hidden assets. In his zeal to accommodate certain ultra-wealthy clients, James had facilitated tax avoidance schemes that crossed well into illegal territory. I had agonized over whether to include this information in my strategy, weighing the potential consequences against my desire for complete disentanglement from James's choices. In the end, Patricia had made the decision simple. If you know about illegal activity and don't report it, you could become complicit. The question isn't whether to disclose this information, but when and how. James sank onto the bed, the full weight of his situation finally registering. "You've destroyed me," he whispered. "No, James," I corrected gently. "You destroyed yourself. I'm simply refusing to be collateral damage." I left him there, surrounded by the trappings of the life we had built and the remnants of the deception he had maintained. As Martin and I descended the stairs, I felt neither triumph nor vindication, only a profound relief that the performance was finally over. The weeks that followed unfolded with predictable legal maneuvers and unpredictable emotional currents. James initially threatened to contest everything: the asset transfers, the divorce terms, even the SEC investigation. His attorneys filed motions and counter-motions demanding expedited hearings and temporary restraining orders against further financial actions on my part. The aggressive strategy collapsed quickly. However, when the SEC investigation gained momentum, faced with potential criminal charges on top of the civil divorce proceedings, James abruptly changed course, seeking settlement negotiations rather than protracted litigation. Patricia was ruthlessly effective during these discussions, leveraging every advantage we had accumulated. We ultimately reached an agreement that formalized most of the asset transfers. I had already executed with minor adjustments to ensure equitable distribution under Massachusetts law. James retained his personal accounts and enough investment assets to maintain a comfortable lifestyle. Though nowhere near the wealth he had amassed during our marriage, the most surprising development came not from the legal proceedings, but from Emily Wright. 3 days after my confrontation with James, she contacted me through Patricia, requesting a private meeting against my attorney's advice. I agreed to see her at a neutral location, a private room at the Boston Public Library, where we would be neither overheard nor interrupted. Emily arrived precisely on time, her elegance undeniable, despite obvious signs of stress. She was younger than me, of course, but not the trophy girlfriend I had imagined. More sophisticated, more substantial. Somehow she carried herself with the composure of someone accustomed to navigating difficult situations. "Thank you for meeting me." She began, her voice steady, but her hands betraying nervousness as she arranged and rearranged her purse strap. "I know this is unconventional." "That seems an inadequate description," I observed, not unkindly. She smiled faintly, acknowledging the understatement. "Fair enough. I'll be direct. Then, James told me about your marriage 2 years ago." This was unexpected. I had assumed Emily was as much a victim of James's deception as I had been, perhaps more so even her vulnerability as a single mother. "You knew he was married, and you continued the relationship." I asked, careful to keep accusation from my tone. This wasn't about assigning blame between women. James alone bore responsibility for his choices, not from the beginning. She clarified. "When we met, he told me he was divorced, had been for years. I had no reason to doubt him by the time I learned the truth. Christopher was 4, and we had built a life together. James swore he was planning to leave you, that he was just waiting for the right time." The familiar narrative, the promise of legitimacy perpetually deferred, was almost comforting in its predictability. How many women throughout history had been placated with similar assurances? "Did you believe him?" I asked Emily. Sighed, a sound weighted with years of complex emotions. "I wanted to, but lately no. I started noticing patterns, the careful compartmentalization, the financial control, small inconsistencies in his stories about business trips." She met my gaze directly. "I hired my own investigator. 3 weeks ago, he discovered you." The wife James claimed no longer existed in any meaningful way. The revelation created an unexpected connection between us. 2 women independently unraveling the same elaborate deception, approaching the truth from opposite directions. "What do you want from this meeting, Emily?" I asked gently. She straightened her demeanor, shifting from apologetic to resolute. I want you to know that I never intended to be the other woman. I never sought to take anything that belonged to you. And most importantly, I want you to know that I'm pursuing my own legal action against James for fraudulent misrepresentation. I won't be competing with your divorce settlement or attempting to claim marital assets. I studied her with newfound respect, recognizing the courage this approach required. What about Christopher? Will you seek child support? Yes, but through proper legal channels, with full financial disclosure and court oversight. No more private arrangements, no more secrecy. Emily hesitated, then added, I've also encouraged James to establish a formal relationship with Christopher through the courts. Whether he chooses to do so is his decision. We talked for almost 2 hours, two strangers connected by intimate knowledge of the same man's capacity for duplicity. By the time we parted, I felt a surprising kinship with Emily Wright. Not friendship exactly, but a mutual acknowledgement of shared experience and separate paths forward. The news about James came 3 months later, as my divorce neared finalization. The SEC investigation had expanded, revealing patterns of securities fraud beyond what I had initially discovered. Faced with mounting evidence and potential criminal charges, James had accepted a plea agreement, significant financial penalties, a lifetime ban from securities trading, and a 5-year prison sentence, with the possibility of reduction for cooperation. I received this information not from the authorities or from Patricia, but from Emily, who called one evening after Christopher had gone to bed. I thought you should hear it from someone who understands. She said simply, How are you handling it? I asked, genuinely concerned for her, and especially for the boy who would now face his father's public disgrace. One day at a time, she replied. Christopher knows his father made mistakes with money and has to face consequences. Beyond that, we're focusing on building our life without James's influence, something I suspect you understand. I did understand in the months since leaving the Wellesley house. I had established a new residence in Cambridge, a sunlit apartment overlooking the Charles River, filled with furniture and art I had selected solely according to my own taste. I had reconnected with friends from my pre-James life, started volunteer work with a financial literacy program for women, and even begun dating casually. Nothing serious, but pleasant reminders that I existed as a person separate from my former role as James Reynolds' wife. The divorce became final in December, almost exactly 1 year after I had discovered the Cartier receipt that unraveled my marriage. The financial settlement reflected the groundwork I had laid through the strategic asset transfers, with minor court-ordered adjustments. I emerged with approximately 30% of what had been our marital estate, a distribution the judge deemed appropriate given the circumstances of the case. James reported to the Federal Correctional Facility in January. I didn't attend his sentencing hearing, didn't send a letter or message of any kind. Our last communication had been through attorneys months earlier, and I intended to maintain that distance permanently. Emily occasionally sent updates about Christopher, including a school photograph that arrived unexpectedly one spring morning. Looking at the boy's familiar smile, so reminiscent of the young James I had fallen in love with decades earlier, I felt a complicated surge of emotion, not regret exactly, nor jealousy, a poignant acknowledgement of parallel possibilities the child James and I might have had in another version of our story. I placed the photograph in my desk drawer rather than displaying it, a private reminder of the complex intersection of lives rather than a daily memento. Christopher would never be my son, nor would I play any role in his life. His existence connected me to my past in ways I was still learning to navigate. On the first anniversary of my departure from the Wellesley house, I invited Patricia Martin and our forensic accountant for dinner at my Cambridge apartment. We had maintained professional relationships throughout the legal proceedings, but this was our first purely social gathering, a celebration of sorts, marking both an ending and a beginning. To Rebecca, Patricia toasted, raising her glass as we sat around my dining table, a handcrafted piece I had commissioned from a local artisan. Rather than selecting from a designer showroom, as James would have insisted, who reminds us that it's never too late to rewrite your story, Martin, typically reserved, added his own sentiment and to justice, which sometimes requires a little help to find its way. We dined and conversed late into the evening, our discussion eventually turning philosophical as the wine flowed freely. Patricia, who had witnessed hundreds of marriages dissolve throughout her career, posed a question that captured our collective attention. Looking back, Rebecca, knowing everything now, would you still have married James? I considered the question carefully, swirling the remaining wine in my glass. The easy answer would be an emphatic no, a repudiation of the man who had betrayed me so thoroughly. But the truth, as always, contained more nuance. Yes, I said, finally surprising, even myself, with the certainty in my voice. Because without those years, without that specific path, I wouldn't be who I am now. I wouldn't have developed the strength it took to walk away, or the wisdom to rebuild afterward. Patricia nodded thoughtfully. Most clients never reach that perspective. They remain trapped in bitterness, defining themselves perpetually as victims of their former partner's actions. I was a victim, I acknowledged, but that was a temporary state, not a permanent identity. Later, after my guests had departed, and I stood alone by the wide windows overlooking the river, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year, from the devastated woman who had discovered her husband's betrayal to the confident person now charting an independent course. The transformation seemed almost too profound to have occurred within a single revolution around the sun. Yet, here I stood, irrevocably changed, not just financially independent, though that security provided essential foundation, not just legally separated from James, though that severance was critical. I had achieved something more fundamental. I had reclaimed myself. The Rebecca who existed before James had gradually disappeared during our marriage, subsumed by his preferences, his ambitions, his narrative. The woman who emerged from the dissolution wasn't merely a return to that earlier self, but someone entirely new, a synthesis of all I had been and all I had endured, now moving forward with hard-won clarity about what truly mattered. As spring yielded to summer, I made a decision that surprised my friends and delighted my attorney. I established the Mitchell Foundation for Financial Independence, using a portion of my divorce settlement to fund educational programs specifically designed for women navigating significant life transitions. The foundation's first initiative, a series of workshops on financial literacy for women contemplating divorce, quickly gained recognition for its practical approach to a sensitive subject. "You've turned pain into purpose," observed one participant after completing the program. "That's the most powerful form of healing." She was right. Of course, each woman who gained confidence through our workshops, each story of successful transition I witnessed further transformed my own experience from personal trauma into meaningful contribution. The betrayal that had once threatened to define me instead became the catalyst for my most significant work. James reached out once during this period, a carefully worded letter sent from the correctional facility where he was serving his sentence. The envelope sat unopened on my desk for 3 days while I contemplated whether to read its contents or return it unacknowledged. Curiosity eventually won over caution. The letter contained neither apology nor explanation, but rather a simple request. Would I consider visiting him? He had matters to discuss that could only be addressed in person. I composed my response with equal simplicity. "There is nothing left to discuss between us. Please direct any necessary communication through our attorneys." The boundaries I had established were not walls built from anger or fortifications erected against future hurt. They were simply clear demarcations of where my responsibility ended and my new life began. A life that had no room for the manipulation and deception that had characterized my relationship with James. Emily contacted me again that fall, this time with news that affected us both. James had been diagnosed with early-stage prostate cancer while in federal custody. The prognosis was favorable, but the diagnosis had apparently triggered a period of reflection for him. "He's been asking about you," she said carefully, "wondering if you found happiness, if you've forgiven him." "What did you tell him?" I asked, genuinely curious about her response, rather than concern about James's inquiry. "I told him that your happiness isn't his business anymore, and that forgiveness isn't something he's entitled to request." She paused, then added, "I hope that was all right." It was perfect. I assured her precisely what I would have said myself. We ended the call with our now customary exchange of good wishes for each other's continued healing. The strange bond between us, neither weakening nor strengthening, simply existing as an acknowledgement of shared history. That evening, I sat on my balcony watching darkness settle over the river, contemplating the concept of forgiveness. Had I forgiven James? The answer wasn't simple. I no longer carried active anger toward him. That consuming rage had burned itself out months ago. I didn't wish him ill. In fact, I hoped his medical treatment would be successful and his remaining years in confinement productive. But forgiveness suggested a restoration of trust, a mending of relationship that I neither sought nor believed possible. Perhaps what I had achieved was something different. A release of James's power over my emotions. A reclamation of energy once spent on resentment, whatever the appropriate term. I knew with certainty that I had moved beyond the defining moment of discovering his betrayal. That revelation had irrevocably altered my life's trajectory, but it no longer dominated my daily thoughts or dictated my choices. As winter approached again, I finalized plans for an extended trip abroad, something I had always wanted to do, but had perpetually postponed to accommodate James's schedule. I would spend 3 months traveling through Europe, visiting art museums, taking cooking classes, and simply experiencing different cultures at my own pace, according to my own interests. The evening before my departure, I received an unexpected delivery, a small package from Emily, containing a handwritten note and a book of Christopher's drawings. The note explained simply, "He wanted you to see these safe travels." The colorful crayon illustrations captured a child's perspective on everyday wonders. A particularly magnificent tree, a dog encountered in the park, an impressive construction crane glimpsed from a car window, nothing extraordinary yet. Profoundly moving in their innocent appreciation of a world still filled with discovery. I carefully wrapped the book in tissue paper and packed it among my traveling essentials, not as a reminder of James or what might have been, but as a touchstone to something more universal. The capacity for new beginnings, for seeing with fresh eyes, for finding joy in unexpected places. As my plane lifted off the following morning, carrying me toward experiences I had once thought permanently beyond my reach, I felt neither triumphant nor vengeful about the life I had reclaimed. Instead, I felt something quieter, but more enduring. A deep settled confidence that whatever challenges awaited, I would face them. Not as James Reynolds's ex-wife, but simply as Rebecca Mitchell, author of her own story, captain of her own course, finally and completely herself. The Italian sun felt different, somehow warmer, more nourishing than the tepid New England rays I had grown accustomed to. Standing on the small balcony of my rented Tuscan villa, overlooking rolling vineyards that stretched toward distant mountains, I found myself contemplating how drastically life could change in just 18 months. My European adventure had expanded far beyond its original 3-month itinerary. After France, Spain, and Italy captivated me in ways I hadn't anticipated, I kept extending my stay, finding freedom in the absence of deadlines or obligations. I had spent Christmas in a charming Parisian apartment, New Year's Eve at a lively gathering of expatriates in Barcelona, and now spring was unfolding around me in the Tuscan countryside. The foundation work continued remotely, with quarterly board meetings conducted via video conference and day-to-day operations, managed by the capable executive director I'd hired before my departure. Technology allowed me to maintain meaningful connection with the organization while experiencing the independence I had craved for so long. My phone chimed softly with an incoming message. Patricia, with news from Boston. The SEC investigation into Reynolds Capital had expanded again, now encompassing several of James's former associates. Though my ex-husband had already begun serving his sentence, the repercussions of his financial improprieties continued to ripple outward, affecting dozens of lives beyond our immediate circle. I typed a brief acknowledgement, then set the phone aside, unwilling to allow James's shadow to darken this perfect morning distance. Both geographic and emotional had provided invaluable perspective. His actions, once all-consuming in my consciousness, now occupied an increasingly peripheral position in my thoughts. The villa's housekeeper called up to announce that my rental car had arrived. Today's agenda included a visit to a local winery, followed by a cooking class in a nearby village. Simple pleasures I now embraced, without considering whether they aligned with someone else's expectations or preferences, as I navigated the narrow winding roads between picturesque hillside towns. I found myself reflecting on the nature of recovery. The acute pain of betrayal had subsided months ago, replaced not by numbness, but by a different kind of sensitivity. I heightened appreciation for beauty, authenticity, and connection. The winery tour proved delightful, conducted by an elderly proprietor whose family had cultivated these same vines for 7 generations. He spoke passionately about soil composition, grape varieties, and aging techniques, his weathered hands gesturing expressively as he described the relationship between terroir and flavor. "You must understand," he explained, through my interpreter, as we tasted a particularly nuanced Sangiovese. "The grape remembers everything: the rainfall, the sunshine, even the arguments between vineyard workers. All of it becomes part of the wine's character." I smiled at the poetic notion, wondering if the same might be true of people if we too incorporated every experience, painful or pleasant, into the essence of who we became. The cooking class followed in a stone farmhouse kitchen, fragrant with garlic and herbs. Our instructor, Sophia, a formidable woman in her 60s with strong forearms and a booming laugh, demonstrated the proper technique for making pasta by hand, no machines. She insisted in accented English. "Your fingers must feel the dough. They must know when it is right." I kneaded obediently, enjoying the tactile sensation of flour and egg transforming under my hands across the workstation. An Australian couple on their honeymoon struggled cheerfully with their portions. The husband's attempts at rolling dough, producing misshapen lumps that sent his wife into fits of giggles, watching their easy affection, the casual touches, the private smiles. I felt a momentary pang, not jealousy exactly, nor regret, but awareness of absence. Despite occasional dinner dates in various European cities, I had maintained a careful distance from romantic entanglements, prioritizing self-discovery over partnership. "You have good hands," Sophia commented, inspecting my evenly rolled sheet of pasta. "Strong but gentle, important balance." I thanked her, oddly moved by the simple compliment. How long had it been since someone had noticed something about me, about my capabilities, rather than my appearance or social position in my former life as James Reynolds's wife? Compliments had generally centered on how well I had orchestrated a dinner party or how appropriately I had dressed for a client event. We proceeded to shape ravioli, tucking ricotta and spinach, filling between delicate pasta squares. My creations emerged neat and uniform, earning another nod of approval from our exacting instructor. "You learn quickly." She observed some people fight the dough. "You cooperate with it." The cooking session concluded with a communal meal in the farmhouse garden. Our handmade pasta served alongside locally produced olive oil, fresh vegetables, and more of the region's exceptional wine conversation flowed easily among the diverse group of travelers. The Australian newlyweds, a retired Canadian professor, a family from Japan, and several solo adventurers like myself. "What brings you to Tuscany?" the professor asked as he refilled my wine glass. The question was innocuous, casual travelers' chit-chat. Yet I found myself hesitating how to summarize the complex journey that had led me to this sun-dappled garden. The betrayal, the strategic counteraction, the reclamation of identity. "I'm giving myself the gift of time," I said finally, learning to experience the world on my own terms. He nodded thoughtfully, as though recognizing something significant beneath my simple explanation. "The most valuable gift possible," he replied, "and remarkably rare." We talked easily through the remainder of the meal, discussing books, architecture, the subtle differences between Italian regional cuisines, topics that engaged my intellect, curiosity, without venturing into personal territory. When email addresses were exchanged at evening's end, I found myself including his, along with those of other participants, open to the possibility of continued conversation without expectation or agenda. Driving back to the villa under a canopy of emerging stars, I felt a quiet contentment that had become increasingly familiar during my European sojourn. Not the frenetic happiness of new love or achievement. Something more sustainable, a steady warmth built on self-knowledge and deliberate choices. The following morning brought an unexpected email from Emily Wright. She rarely initiated contact. These days, our communication limited to occasional updates about Christopher or passing along pertinent information regarding James's legal situation. This message was different, more personal, almost confessional in tone. "I've been thinking about transitions lately," she wrote. "Christopher started a new school this fall, one better suited to his learning style. Watching him adapt, nervous at first, then gradually finding his place, made me reflect on our parallel journeys, different circumstances, similar challenges. I hope your travels are bringing you the peace and clarity you deserve." I sat with the message for several minutes before responding, appreciating the gesture. While carefully considering appropriate boundaries, Emily and I shared a unique connection forged through extraordinary circumstances. Yet we were neither friends in the conventional sense, nor merely associates bound by legal matters. My reply acknowledged her thoughtfulness without deepening our entanglement. "Thank you for your kind wishes. Transitions indeed reveal our capacity for growth, often in unexpected ways. I'm glad Christopher is thriving in his new environment, and I hope you continue to find your own path forward." Later that day, exploring a medieval village, perched atop a rocky outcrop, I found myself in a small gallery displaying contemporary works by local artists. A series of abstract paintings caught my attention. Bold swirls of color against pristine white backgrounds, suggesting motion and transformation. "The artist calls this collection metamorphosis," explained the gallery owner, noticing my interest. "Each canvas represents a stage in personal evolution." I studied the progression from chaotic, dark-hued compositions toward increasingly harmonious arrangements where vibrant colors found balance and integration. The final piece featured a central spiral of gold leaf, catching the light from various angles, changing subtly as viewers moved around it. "It's about becoming the owner," continued. "Not a single moment of change, but an ongoing process." I purchased the golden spiral painting without hesitation, arranging for its shipment to my Cambridge apartment. My first significant acquisition of art without consulting anyone else's taste or considering how it would complement existing decor. The piece would serve as a reminder of this period of transformation when I eventually returned to Boston. When would that be exactly? The question had begun to surface with increasing frequency as my European stay extended from months into a full year. The foundation work continued successfully under its executive director's leadership. My financial situation remained secure thanks to the divorce settlement and prudent investments. Nothing demanded my physical presence in Boston. No professional obligations, no family commitments, no property requiring personal attention. Yet I sensed my extended sabbatical approaching its natural conclusion. The lessons of solitude and self-determination had been thoroughly absorbed. The healing distance from past trauma had served its purpose. Something was shifting within me, not a desire to return to my former life, a readiness to construct something new on the solid foundation I had established. That evening, I initiated a video call with Patricia, who had evolved from legal counsel to trusted advisor and friend. "You look well," she observed immediately. "The Mediterranean lifestyle clearly agrees with you." I smiled, acknowledging the compliment. "It's been transformative in ways I hadn't anticipated. I think I'm ready to come home, or at least to decide where home should be going forward." Patricia nodded, unsurprised. "I've been expecting this call. You've never been one to hide indefinitely." "Rebecca, that's not in your nature." We discussed practical considerations, the foundation's expanding initiatives, potential speaking engagements related to financial empowerment, real estate options beyond my Cambridge apartment. Throughout the conversation, Patricia maintained her characteristic blend of pragmatism and insight. "The question isn't whether you're ready to return," she noted toward the call's conclusion. "It's what you're returning to, not what you left behind, but what you're moving toward." The distinction resonated deeply. I wasn't contemplating a retreat to familiar territory, but an advance into terrain of my own. Choosing the realization brought both clarity and challenge. The exhilarating, terrifying freedom of authoring one's own story, without predetermined plot points or established characters. "I'll be back next month," I decided aloud, "not permanently, not yet. Long enough to assess options and make intentional choices about next steps." After ending the call, I stepped onto the villa's balcony again. Breathing in the fragrant evening air, the Tuscan landscape stretched before me, bathed in the golden light of approaching sunset. Beautiful, nurturing, but ultimately not mine. My journey here had been necessary healing, illuminating. The path forward lay elsewhere. The knowledge settled within me, not with the sharp certainty of my decision to leave James, but with the gentle rightness of natural progression. One chapter concluding another beginning, not through external disruption this time, but through internal readiness. My return to Boston coincided with early autumn, the city at its most beautiful, with crimson-tinged foliage in the public garden, and a certain crispness to the air that energized rather than chilled. The Cambridge apartment welcomed me back with familiar comfort, though it felt smaller somehow after the expansive European landscapes I had inhabited. Within days of my arrival, my calendar filled with foundation meetings, coffee dates, with friends maintained through long-distance communication, explorations of neighborhoods I had never properly appreciated. During my marriage, I moved through the city with fresh perspective, seeing possibilities rather than memories around every corner. One particularly productive foundation meeting ran late into the evening, our discussion of a potential partnership with a women's shelter. So engaging that none of us noticed the time until the restaurant began closing around us. As we gathered our materials and prepared to depart, the executive director touched. "I almost forgot someone's been trying to reach you. A man called the office 3 times last week, asking when you'd be back in Boston." My pulse quickened slightly. "Did he leave a name?" "Thomas Chen said he worked with you on a personal matter a while back. I told him we expected you this week, but couldn't give out your direct contact information." Martin's son. The connection registered immediately during my divorce proceedings. I had learned that my private investigator's interest in financial matters stemmed from his son's career as a forensic accountant, specializing in high-net-worth divorce cases. Thomas had occasionally consulted on technical aspects of my financial strategy, though we had never developed a personal rapport. Did he mention why he was trying to reach me? The director shook her head, just that it was important and related to your former husband. I thanked her for the message, promising to follow up. Later that evening, I located Thomas's business card in my files and sent a brief email acknowledging his attempts to contact me and providing my current information. His response arrived within minutes. Thank you for reaching out. This matter is best discussed in person. Are you available tomorrow morning? The cryptic message triggered a momentary unease. After 18 months of minimal contact with anything related to James, the prospect of new complications felt unwelcome still. Thomas Chen's professional reputation was impeccable. If he considered something important enough to pursue me through multiple channels, it warranted attention. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe near the Harvard campus the following morning. I arrived early, selecting a corner table that offered both privacy and a clear view of the entrance. Thomas appeared precisely at the agreed time, his professional demeanor unchanged from our previous interactions. Conservative suit, understated tie expression, revealing nothing. After brief pleasantries, he placed a slim folder on the table between us during routine monitoring of financial activities. Connected to your ex-husband's case, I noticed something unusual: transactions that didn't align with the patterns we'd established during the investigation. I kept my expression neutral, though my stomach tightened involuntarily. What kind of transactions? A series of property transfers and investment reallocation executed approximately 6 months ago. Well, after your divorce was finalized and Mr. Reynolds was already serving his sentence. He opened the folder revealing documents, annotated with his precise handwriting, property deeds, investment statements, corporate filings, all showing significant assets moving through a complex series of entities before consolidating under a single holding company. These maneuvers have James' signature style, the layered entities, the jurisdictional shifting. They couldn't have been executed by him directly given his incarceration and the restrictions on his financial activities. I studied the documents, recognizing addresses and account numbers. These were part of our marital estate assets I received in the divorce settlement. Thomas nodded exactly, which raises the question, who initiated these transfers and why? The pattern suggests deliberate restructuring outside normal asset management. The implication hung between us, unspoken but clear. Someone was manipulating financial resources connected to my divorce settlement resources that should have been under my exclusive control. Could it be a delayed action? I asked. Something set in motion before James's incarceration that only executed recently. Thomas shook his head. These transactions required real-time authorization codes and verification steps. Their recent intentional actions requiring active participation by someone with significant access to your financial information. The cafe suddenly felt too warm, too confined. I sipped water, buying time to process this unexpected development. What's the end game? Where are these assets now? That's where it gets interesting. Thomas turned to a final document, a corporate registration form for an entity called Phoenix Acquisition Partners, LLC. Everything ultimately consolidated here, and this entity's beneficial ownership trace leads to someone you know quite well. He slid a photograph across the table, a surveillance image showing a familiar figure entering an office building. Emily Wright. The shock must have registered on my face because Thomas continued quickly. My father suspected there might be more to Ms. Wright's story than initially appeared. Her cooperation during your divorce proceedings seemed almost too smooth. Her disavowal of James to complete. He maintained periodic surveillance as a precaution. I stared at the image, trying to reconcile this new information with the Emily I thought I knew, the fellow victim who had reached out with surprising grace, who had shared Christopher's artwork, who had seemingly navigated her own recovery from James's deception with dignity. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm not suggesting anything yet," Thomas replied carefully. "I'm presenting anomalies that warrant investigation. The financial restructuring of your assets through entities now controlled by your ex-husband's former mistress represents either an extraordinarily unlikely coincidence or a deliberate strategy we haven't identified." He closed the folder, sliding it toward me. "My father always taught me that when analyzing complex financial situations, emotional narratives create dangerous blind spots. The story we tell ourselves about relationships, who's victim, who's villain, can prevent us from seeing objective patterns in the data." The implication was clear. Had I been manipulated again? Had the narrative of two women united in recovery from the same man's deception been yet another elaborate performance? "What would you recommend?" I asked, professional instincts engaging despite the emotional undertow. "First, comprehensive security reviews of all your financial accounts, changing access credentials, and verification procedures. Second, discreet investigation into Ms. Wright's recent activities and associations. Third, preparation of documentation for potential legal action. Depending on what we discover," I nodded, decisions crystallizing even as questions multiplied. "Proceed with all three immediately. Use whatever resources necessary. And Thomas, this stays between us for now. No foundation staff, no friends, not even Patricia, until we know exactly what we're dealing with." He agreed, readily gathering his materials, with efficient movements before departing. He paused, expressions softening fractionally. "Ms. Mitchell, regardless of what we uncover, please remember this. Recognizing manipulation doesn't diminish your strength. Sometimes the most sophisticated deceptions target the most formidable opponents." The sentiment, clearly intended as reassurance, provided little comfort as I remained at the cafe, mind racing through possibilities and implications. Had Emily been James's accomplice all along? Had their apparent estrangement been orchestrated specifically to gain my trust? Was Christopher's artwork, those innocent crayon drawings that had moved me so deeply, just another prop in an elaborate con? The very questions felt like surrender to paranoia, yet dismissing them might represent dangerous naivete. The hardest-earned lesson of the past 2 years echoed consistently: trust required verification, especially where significant assets were concerned. I spent the remainder of the day in a curious, dissociative state, attending a foundation budget meeting, reviewing grant applications, having dinner with friends, all while part of my consciousness cataloged every interaction with Emily since our first meeting at the Boston Public Library. Each conversation, each seemingly spontaneous disclosure, each carefully maintained boundary now demanded re-examination through a lens of potential calculation. By evening, Thomas had already implemented preliminary security measures, changing access protocols for my primary accounts, and establishing enhanced monitoring systems. His initial report confirmed unusual access patterns associated with several investment portfolios included in my divorce settlement. Multiple login attempts from IP addresses associated with locations where I had never been. Sleep eluded me that night as I wrestled with emerging possibilities. If Emily had indeed orchestrated financial manipulation at James's direction, what was their ultimate objective? Simple theft seemed too straightforward, too easily detected. Whatever strategy they were implementing involved subtlety and patience, hallmarks of James's approach to both business and betrayal. Morning brought both clarity and complication. Thomas arrived at my apartment with updated findings. The Phoenix Acquisition Partners entity had recently purchased a controlling interest in a promising biotech startup founded by one of James's former clients. The investment represented precisely the kind of opportunity James would have pursued before his legal troubles. High risk, high potential return, requiring significant initial capital and specialized industry knowledge. They're rebuilding his portfolio. I realized aloud, using my assets to recreate what he lost. Thomas nodded, his expression grim. The strategy appears to be positioning Ms. Wright as the public face of what is essentially James Reynolds' investment approach, given his ban from securities trading. This could represent an attempt to circumvent the legal restrictions while maintaining effective control of significant capital. The audacity was breathtaking, using my own resources to finance James's continued market manipulation from behind prison walls, with Emily serving as his proxy in the outside world. The scheme explained their continued connection despite James's conviction, as well as Emily's sustained interest in maintaining communication with me. She wasn't cultivating friendship, she was monitoring a mark. "How do we proceed?" I asked, shifting immediately to counteraction rather than dwelling on the betrayal. "Carefully," Thomas advised. "What they're doing likely violates terms of Mr. Reynolds' plea agreement and could constitute financial fraud, but proving it requires establishing clear connection between his directives and Ms. Wright's actions. Moving too quickly could alert them and potentially lead to further concealment of assets. We developed a multi-phase approach, continued monitoring of Emily's activities and financial movements, forensic analysis of all transactions connected to the transferred assets, and careful documentation of every communication I had received from either Emily or James since the divorce." The investigation proceeded methodically over subsequent weeks, revealing an increasingly complex web of connections. Emily had visited James regularly throughout his incarceration, their meetings recorded in visitor logs but seemingly innocuous, a former partner bringing their child to maintain family connection despite difficult circumstances. Financial records told a different story. Following each visit, specific transaction patterns emerged: new accounts, established funds transferred, investment positions adjusted. The correlation was too consistent to be coincidental, strongly suggesting that James was providing explicit financial directions, which Emily then executed through the network of entities they had established. Most disturbing was evidence that my own communications had been compromised. The European email account I had used during my extended travel showed signs of unauthorized access. Someone had been monitoring my correspondence, my plans, my evolving perspectives. The knowledge that my private reflections had been surveilled created a visceral reaction beyond mere anger. A profound violation that reached beyond financial matters into personal sovereignty. Throughout this discovery process, Emily continued occasional contact, congratulating me on a foundation initiative featured in the Boston Globe, sharing an anecdote about Christopher's science project, maintaining the carefully crafted illusion of respectful distance between women connected by circumstance. Each message now read is calculated performance designed to sustain trust while their financial strategy advanced. After nearly a month of investigation, Thomas presented comprehensive documentation, establishing what he termed a clear pattern of coordinated financial activity between James Reynolds and Emily Wright, utilizing assets improperly transferred from Rebecca Mitchell's accounts. The evidence was substantial enough to warrant legal action, potentially resulting in additional charges against James and new proceedings against Emily. Before pursuing that course, however, I requested something unexpected: a meeting with Emily, right on my terms, at a location of my choosing. "Are you certain that's wise?" Thomas questioned, understandably concerned. Any warning might trigger defensive actions regarding the compromised assets. "We've already secured the primary accounts," I reminded him. "What remains at risk is minimal compared to what we've recovered, and before involving authorities, I want to understand exactly what I'm dealing with." The real motivation ran deeper than pragmatic asset protection. After being deceived twice, first by James, then by this coordinated manipulation, I needed to confront the architects of betrayal directly. Not from a position of vulnerability, this time from one of confirmed knowledge and strategic advantage. Emily agreed to meet with surprising readiness. When I contacted her suggesting she suspected nothing about the investigation, we arranged to convene at the same Boston Public Library room where we had first met nearly 2 years earlier, a symmetry that felt appropriate for what would likely be our final interaction. I arrived early, accompanied by Thomas, who positioned himself discreetly nearby, close enough to intervene if necessary, but maintaining sufficient distance for privacy. The evidence documentation remains secured in a briefcase at my side, its contents organized for maximum impact. When revealed, Emily entered precisely on time, dressed elegantly, as always, her expression conveying polite interest, tinged with curiosity. She took the seat across from me, arranging herself with practiced poise, the same performance of dignified resilience she had maintained throughout our acquaintance. "Thank you for making time to meet." I began, my tone deliberately neutral. "I've been reflecting on our unique connection and the circumstances that brought us into each other's lives." She nodded, offering a small smile. "It's been an unusual relationship, certainly. I've always appreciated your grace in a situation where animosity would have been understandable." The practiced sincerity in her voice, once convincing, now transparent, strengthened my resolve. Without further preamble, I opened the briefcase and removed the first document, a visitor log from the Federal Correctional Facility, showing 18 visits from Emily to James over the past year. "Let's dispense with pretense," I suggested, sliding the paper toward her. "We both know these weren't merely visits to maintain Christopher's relationship with his father." Her expression flickered briefly, surprise, then calculation before settling into careful neutrality. "I never claimed they were exclusively for Christopher's benefit. James remained significant in my life, complicated as that relationship. Maybe I placed a second document on the table, a corporate registration connecting Emily to Phoenix Acquisition Partners, significant enough to facilitate his continued investment activities despite federal prohibitions, significant enough to access accounts containing my assets without authorization." The direct accusation landed with visible impact. Emily's posture stiffened, her gaze sharpening as she assessed this new reality, one where her actions had been discovered and documented. "You've been investigating me," she stated flatly, neither confirming nor denying the allegations, "investigating unusual financial activity connected to my accounts," I corrected. "Your involvement emerged as the explanation for those anomalies." A tense silence stretched between us as Emily visibly weighed her options. When she finally spoke, her tone had shifted from warm familiarity to cool pragmatism. "What exactly do you want from this conversation, Rebecca? If you had sufficient evidence of wrongdoing, you would have involved authorities already. The fact that we're meeting privately suggests you're seeking something else." Her assessment wasn't entirely incorrect. While the evidence supported legal action, my objective extended beyond simple prosecution. "I want understanding," I answered honestly. "Was any of it real? Your apparent break with James, your outreach to me, your sharing of Christopher's life, or was it all calculated from the beginning? A strategy conceived while James prepared for his inevitable legal consequences?" Emily studied me for a long moment, something like respect flickering across her features. Then, remarkably, she laughed, a short, genuine sound, devoid of her usual, careful modulation. "You really are extraordinary," she observed. "James told me you were smarter than you appeared, but I don't think even he recognized the full extent of your capabilities." She leaned forward, dropping the cultivated vulnerability that had characterized our previous interactions. "The original connection was strategic. Yes, James anticipated his legal vulnerability and began positioning assets and relationships accordingly. My role evolved from romantic partner to business proxy. The confirmation, despite its predictability, given the evidence, still landed with surprising force. And Christopher, was he part of the strategy too? Something genuine flashed in Emily's eyes, then a mother's instinctive defensiveness. "Christopher is real. My love for him is real. His existence wasn't planned. Once he arrived, he became the center of everything. including James's contingency planning. She gestured toward the documents spread between us. What you've uncovered is essentially an insurance policy, a mechanism to preserve resources and opportunities for Christopher's future. Regardless of legal outcomes, James always intended for his son to inherit his financial legacy with or without the Reynolds name attached. Using my assets, I noted coldly. Emily had the grace to look momentarily discomforted, using whatever resources were available. James never accepted that the divorce settlement was final or fair. In his mind, those remained his assets temporarily under your control. The breathtaking entitlement embedded in this perspective rendered me momentarily speechless, even after conviction. Even from behind prison walls, James continued operating with absolute confidence in his right to control and manipulate, to take what wasn't his and reshape reality according to his preferences. And you, I asked finally, what was your motivation beyond securing Christopher's inheritance, financial gain? Love for James, or just the satisfaction of outmaneuvering the woman he married? Emily considered the question with apparent seriousness. Initially, practical survival when James's legal troubles became inevitable. I needed security for Christopher and myself. The arrangement James proposed offered that security, along with continued connection to Christopher's father. She paused, then continued with surprising candor. As for you specifically, I didn't begin with any particular animosity. You were simply a factor in the equation. The legal wife, whose position created certain complications. The genuine connection that developed between us was unexpected but useful, I observed. She didn't deny it. Human connection is always useful, Rebecca. Genuine or strategic, it facilitates cooperation, reduces scrutiny, enables progress toward objectives that doesn't necessarily make it insincere. The calculating pragmatism underlying her perspective was almost admirable in its clarity, a perfect complement to James's manipulative charm. They were well-matched operators, approaching the world as a series of opportunities for tactical advantage rather than genuine engagement. What happens now? Emily asked, her gaze steady on the evidence documentation. That depends on your next moves, I replied. The unauthorized transfers have been reversed. Additional security measures have been implemented. Your access to any resources connected to me has been permanently terminated. I leaned forward slightly, meeting her gaze directly, if those boundaries are respected. Going forward, this evidence remains private. If not, it goes immediately to federal prosecutors, likely resulting in conspiracy charges for you and additional sanctions for James. Emily absorbed this information silently, her expression revealing nothing of her internal calculations. And Christopher, she finally asked, he's innocent in all this. Christopher remains entirely outside my concern. I answered truthfully. My interest extends only to protecting what's rightfully mine and preventing further manipulation. She nodded slowly, appearing to accept these terms. As she gathered her belongings to depart, she paused, regarding me with what seemed like genuine curiosity. You could have pursued charges immediately. Why didn't you? The question deserved honesty, if only to conclude our interaction with one moment of genuine exchange. Revenge isn't healing. Acting from anger only perpetuates its power. I've worked too hard to reclaim my life, to allow either you or James to dictate my choices. Again, even choices about how to respond to your deception. The London rain tapped gently against my office window as I reviewed the quarterly reports for the Mitchell Foundation's European division. 3 years had passed since we'd expanded internationally. Our programs now operated in 7 countries, helping thousands of women navigate financial transitions with dignity and confidence. The foundation had evolved far beyond its origins, becoming an organization that even Eleanor, with her rigorous academic standards, described as genuinely transformative. A notification appeared on my screen, a news alert from a financial publication I monitored primarily out of professional interest rather than personal concern. The headline contained a name I recognized immediately. Renaissance Advisory Group faces regulatory scrutiny over cross-border transactions. James's latest venture was apparently encountering complications with European financial authorities. I scanned the article with detached curiosity. The details were predictably familiar. Questionable transactions disguised within legitimate business operations. Regulatory gray areas exploited through complex corporate structures. Technically legal maneuvers that violated the spirit, if not the letter of financial regulations. James had simply transferred his established patterns to new territories with different oversight mechanisms. Closing the article without finishing it, I turned instead to preparation for tomorrow's board meeting. The Foundation's newest initiative, a IT technology platform, providing accessible financial education to women in rural communities, had shown promising early results that warranted expanded funding. My presentation needed to balance encouraging metrics with realistic acknowledgement of implementation challenges. My phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor Dinner tonight with the Blackwells Marians in town for the Economic Forum. The casual normalcy of the text, an invitation to dine with colleagues who had become friends, highlighted how thoroughly my life had transformed. The woman who had once organized her entire existence around James's schedule and preferences now moved through days shaped by meaningful work, authentic relationships, and choices aligned with personal values rather than others' expectations. I confirmed the dinner plans before returning to my presentation preparation. The rhythm of purposeful work, balanced partnership, and genuine connection had replaced the constant vigilance and strategic maneuvering that characterized life during and immediately after discovering James's betrayal. Not that vigilance had disappeared entirely. Thomas Chen's firm still monitored certain financial channels as a precaution. It no longer consumed significant mental or emotional energy. The afternoon proceeded with Foundation Matters, a conference call with program directors across European sites, review of grant applications, consultation with our legal team regarding charitable registration requirements in 2 additional countries. Throughout these varied responsibilities, I experienced the steady engagement of meaningful work rather than the performative busyness that had characterized my role in James's business. Around 4 o'clock, Patricia's name appeared on my caller ID, an unexpected but welcome interruption. Though she had officially retired from legal practice the previous year, we maintained regular contact that had evolved from professional association to genuine friendship. "Rebecca," she greeted me warmly. "Hope I'm not interrupting anything crucial." "Nothing that can't wait," I assured her. "How's retirement treating you? Busier than expected?" "The consulting requests keep coming despite my best efforts to disappear into obscurity. But that's not why I'm calling." She paused briefly. "I thought you should know about a development regarding James, something that won't make the financial news, but might be relevant to your peace of mind." My interest piqued, not from lingering emotional attachment, but from practical consideration of potential implications. "What's happened?" "He was diagnosed with early-stage pancreatic cancer last month," Patricia said gently. "I learned about it through mutual contacts in the legal community who are handling his affairs. The prognosis is guarded, but not immediately terminal. With appropriate treatment." I absorbed this information with unexpected neutrality, neither satisfaction at karmic justice nor distress at human suffering, but simple acknowledgement of another person's significant life event. "Thank you for letting me know. Is there something I should be doing in response?" "Not at all," Patricia replied quickly. "I'm sharing this information purely as a courtesy, not suggesting any obligation on your part, given your history and the Foundation's public profile. I thought you should hear it through a trusted source, rather than potentially being blindsided." The consideration reflected Patricia's consistent thoughtfulness throughout our association. "I appreciate that. Has he requested any contact?" "No," she confirmed. "From what I understand, he's keeping the diagnosis relatively private while exploring treatment options. Emily Wright is apparently managing most of his affairs during this period." The mention of Emily added context without triggering the weariness. It might once have elicited their continued association, whether romantic, pragmatic, or some combination existed entirely separate from my life and concerns. After concluding the call with Patricia, I found myself contemplating not James's illness specifically, but the broader question of how past connections inform present circumstances without defining them. The news generated neither vindication nor anguish, merely recognition that someone who had once occupied central position in my life now existed at its periphery. His circumstances noted, but not determining my emotional state. Later that evening, as Eleanor and I walked to the restaurant to meet the Blackwells, I mentioned Patricia's call. James has been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Early stage, but serious. Nonetheless, Eleanor's response reflected her characteristic blend of emotional intelligence and pragmatic assessment. How do you feel about that information? The question prompted genuine reflection rather than automatic response. Mostly neutral with perhaps a touch of compassion for another human facing mortality, but no sense of personal involvement or responsibility. She nodded thoughtfully. That seems entirely appropriate. Compassion without entanglement represents significant emotional health. The observation captured something essential about the journey I had navigated since discovering James's betrayal. Movement from devastation through strategic counteraction to genuine detachment, not detachment born from numbness or denial, but from authentic recognition that his choices and circumstances no longer defined my identity or determined my well-being. Dinner with the Blackwells proceeded with engaging conversation about economic policy, academic politics, and plans for upcoming holidays. Marian Blackwell, an influential economist whose research on gender disparities in financial systems had informed several foundation initiatives, shared preliminary findings from her latest study, examining how automated lending algorithms perpetuated historical biases. The technology itself isn't inherently discriminatory. She explained between courses, but when trained on historical data reflecting centuries of unequal access, it inevitably reproduces those patterns without appropriate intervention. The discussion evolved naturally into potential foundation responses, educational programming, addressing algorithmic literacy, advocacy for regulatory oversight, perhaps direct investment in alternative assessment models developed by women-led financial technology firms. Throughout the evening, ideas flowed with the wine, professional insights, enriching personal connection without overtaking it. As we walked home through London's illuminated streets, Eleanor's arm linked comfortably through mine. The contrast between present contentment and past circumstances struck me with particular clarity. The woman who had once discovered her husband's betrayal through an accidental receipt now navigated a life constructed through deliberate choices rather than reactive responses. "You're particularly contemplative tonight," Eleanor observed as we approached our townhouse. "Is it the news about James?" "Partly," I acknowledged, "but more broadly, I'm thinking about trajectories, how different choices, at critical moments, create entirely divergent paths." Back in our home, settled comfortably in the living room, with late evening tea, I elaborated on this reflection. If I hadn't discovered that receipt, if I'd continued believing in our marriage, despite growing inconsistencies, I might still be living as an extension of James's identity Bedke rather than fully occupying my own. Eleanor considered this counterfactual with characteristic thoughtfulness perhaps. Or perhaps another catalyst would have eventually triggered similar awakening. The capacity for transformation existed within you, regardless of specific circumstance that activated it. The observation resonated deeply. The strength demonstrated throughout divorce proceedings, financial reclamation, foundation development, and personal rediscovery hadn't been created by betrayal's discovery, but merely revealed through response to it. The essential self capable of strategic action and authentic reconstruction had always existed beneath accommodating behaviors and adaptive compromises. The following morning, a request appeared in my professional email that momentarily disrupted established equanimity. Emily Wright, acting as James's business representative, proposed a meeting to discuss potential philanthropic collaboration between Renaissance Advisory Group, the Mitchell Foundation focusing on financial education for underserved communities. The unexpected outreach triggered immediate skepticism after years of separation, maintained through clear boundaries and legal parameters. Why initiate contact now? The timing following James's diagnosis and coinciding with regulatory scrutiny of his business operations suggested strategic motivation rather than genuine philanthropic interest. I forwarded the message to Thomas Chen with a brief note: suspicious timing. Please advise regarding potential agenda beyond stated purpose. His response arrived within hours, confirming my assessment with additional context. Renaissance facing significant regulatory challenges. Philanthropic association with respected foundation would provide reputational advantages during investigation. Recommend declining proposed meeting through formal channels, citing conflict of interest policies. The recommendation aligned with my instinctive response. Whatever rehabilitation of image James sought through association with legitimate philanthropic work would need to occur through channels unconnected to our shared history. The Foundation's mission and credibility couldn't be compromised through entanglement with potentially problematic business practices. My reply to Emily maintained professional courtesy while establishing clear boundaries. Thank you for your interest in the Mitchell Foundation's work. After careful consideration and consultation with our governance committee, we must decline the proposed meeting due to established conflict of interest protocols regarding parties with prior legal entanglements. We wish Renaissance Advisory Group success with its philanthropic initiatives through other partnership opportunities. The exchange required minimal emotional energy, a straightforward application of organizational policies, rather than personal reaction to attempted manipulation. This represented perhaps the most significant evidence of transformation. The ability to respond to potential boundary violations from position of institutional authority rather than personal vulnerability. That afternoon, while reviewing program evaluations in my office, I received an unexpected visitor. The Foundation's receptionist announced that Dr. Eleanor Whitman had arrived without appointment, unusual given Eleanor's typically structured schedule and respect for professional boundaries between our roles. Eleanor entered, carrying a small wrapped package and wearing an expression that combined mischief with genuine warmth. I know you're buried in preparation for tomorrow's board meeting, but I couldn't resist interrupting for a moment. I welcomed the break, curious about both the unexpected visit and mysterious package. What's the occasion? Check your calendar. She suggested, placing the package on my desk. I glanced at the date displayed on my computer screen, momentarily confused, until recognition dawned. Today marked exactly 3 years since I had discovered James's betrayal. Through that Cartier receipt, the catalyst for transformation that had ultimately led to every aspect of my current life. You remembered, I said softly, genuinely moved by this acknowledgement of personal milestone amid professional demands. Of course, Eleanor replied, not to commemorate the betrayal itself, but to honor your response to it, the choices that created everything that followed. Bunny. The package contained a small bronze sculpture, abstract female form, emerging from rough stone transition from confinement to freedom, captured in fluid metallic lines. The base bore a simple inscription: transformation is not what happens to you, but what you do with what happens. The gift acknowledged something fundamental about human resilience, the distinction between circumstance and response, between events experienced and meaning created through engagement with them. James's betrayal represented merely catalyst. The subsequent journey of reclamation and reconstruction constituted the actual achievement worth commemorating. It's perfect, I told Eleanor, genuinely moved by both the symbolic representation and underlying recognition. Thank you for seeing the whole story, not just its difficult beginning, she smiled. Professional demeanor momentarily replaced by the private tenderness that characterized our personal relationship 3 years ago. Today, a different life ended, but more importantly, this one began. That deserves recognition. After Eleanor departed for an afternoon lecture, I found myself contemplating the sculpture's significance beyond its immediate symbolism. The journey from devastated discovery to present fulfillment hadn't proceeded through linear progression or dramatic epiphany, but through consistent choices aligned with emerging values rather than reactive emotion. The following day's board meeting proceeded successfully with approval for expanded funding of the Rural Technology Initiative and productive discussion of potential expansion into 2 additional European countries. As Foundation Chairman concluded proceedings, he acknowledged the organization's remarkable growth under my leadership from single-focused domestic program to international institution, addressing multifaceted aspects of women's financial empowerment. The Mitchell Foundation's evolution reflects something profound about transformation itself. He observed how personal experience can translate into institutional impact. When approached with strategic vision rather than limited reaction, the assessment captured something essential about effective response to betrayal or loss. The distinction between allowing such experiences to define identity and using them as catalysts for meaningful construction. The Foundation's work now extended far beyond its origins and personal adversity, creating value that existed independently of the circumstances that initially inspired its creation that evening. Reviewing the day's outcomes with Eleanor over dinner conversation turned naturally to future possibilities. Potential research collaborations, program expansions, perhaps even consideration of more integrated living arrangements between our London and Oxford residences. Throughout these discussions, I experienced neither anxiety about unknown outcomes nor attachment to predetermined plans, but comfortable engagement with emerging possibilities. You know what strikes me most about our conversations now, compared to even a year ago? Eleanor observed the complete absence of James's shadow across your considerations, not through denial or avoidance, but genuine transcendence of his influence on your decision-making. The observation articulated something I had felt, but not explicitly identified. The fundamental shift from choices influenced by reaction against past experience to decisions guided by authentic values and aspirations. Freedom from James's influence involved not just financial and legal separation, but emotional and psychological independence from patterns established during that relationship. Later that night, preparing for sleep in our London home, I found myself reflecting on the complex journey from betrayal's discovery to present fulfillment. The woman who had once organized her entire existence around supporting her husband's ambitions and managing his household now operated from centered self-definition, making choices aligned with personal values rather than external expectations. This transformation hadn't occurred through dramatic reinvention, but through consistent small decisions, choosing investigation over blind acceptance, strategic action over helpless victimhood, authentic connection over protective isolation. Each choice had reinforced fundamental truth. Identity wasn't determined by circumstances experienced, but by responses chosen as sleep approached, bringing with it the peaceful rest of someone aligned with authentic purpose. I recognized with quiet certainty that the journey precipitated by discovering James's betrayal had reached its appropriate conclusion, not through dramatic confrontation or perfect resolution, but through genuine transcendence of its defining influence. The receipt that had initiated this transformation, that small paper evidence of betrayal, tucked into a turquoise Tiffany envelope, no longer represented devastating revelation or tactical advantage, but merely historical artifact from previous chapter. Its significance had been fully absorbed and transformed. Its potential for continued influence neutralized through comprehensive response. The life built in betrayals, aftermath, meaningful work through the Foundation, authentic partnership with Eleanor. Genuine connections with friends and colleagues existed not as reaction against past injury, but as independent creation aligned with core values. This represented not just recovery from specific trauma, but fundamental reclamation of authorship over personal narrative. In that peaceful moment between wakefulness and sleep, I experienced profound gratitude, not for the betrayal itself, which remained unnecessary cruelty, but for the capacity to transform painful discovery into catalyst for authentic reconstruction. The journey from devastation to fulfillment had revealed something essential, not just about relationships or financial independence, but about human resilience itself, our extraordinary ability to create meaning and purpose from even the most difficult circumstances. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, foundation initiatives, relationship dynamics, perhaps even unexpected encounters with James or Emily in professional contexts, would be navigated from position of integrated strength rather than reactive vulnerability, not because difficulty had been permanently banished, but because response to it had been fundamentally transformed as consciousness yielded to dream. My final waking thought acknowledged simple truth. At transformation's core, we cannot control what happens to us, but we retain absolute authority over who we become through our response to it. That realization, more than any specific achievement or circumstance, represented the true gift emerging from betrayals, painful revelation, the discovery of capacity for authorship over one's own life story, regardless of unexpected plot twists introduced by others' choices. 6 months after that peaceful night, I found myself standing at a podium in Geneva, addressing an international conference on women's financial empowerment. Representatives from financial institutions, educational organizations, and governmental agencies filled the auditorium. Their attention focused on the Mitchell Foundation's innovative approach to systemic change. True financial empowerment extends beyond basic literacy, I explained, gesturing toward the data projected behind me. It requires dismantling structural barriers while simultaneously building individual capability. Our programs succeed because they address both dimensions simultaneously. The presentation highlighted our newest initiative, a comprehensive digital platform providing everything from basic budgeting skills to advanced investment strategies tailored to women at different life stages and socioeconomic circumstances. Early adoption metrics exceeded projections, with particularly strong engagement among women navigating major life transitions. As questions followed the formal presentation, an attendee from a Swiss banking consortium raised her hand. Your foundation's growth trajectory is remarkable for an organization still in its relative infancy. What do you consider the critical factor in that success? The question prompted momentary reflection. Authenticity, I answered. Finally, our programs emerge from lived experience rather than theoretical constructs. We understand the challenges we address because we've navigated them ourselves. Later at the reception following the formal sessions, I found myself engaged in conversation with the Swiss banker who had posed that insightful question. Marguerite Beaumont, Senior Director of Client Services at a prestigious Geneva institution, expressed particular interest in our approach to supporting women through divorce and separation. Financial institutions typically view such transitions through risk management lens. She observed, sipping champagne thoughtfully. Your foundation approaches them as opportunities for reclamation and growth. That paradigm shift intrigues me. Our discussion evolved naturally from professional exchange to more personal reflection as we shared experiences navigating male-dominated financial environments. Marguerite mentioned something that momentarily disrupted my composed professionalism. I recently reviewed an application for private banking services from an American client Renaissance advisory group. The principal seemed familiar with your foundation, mentioned potential philanthropic alignment. I believe his name was Reynolds. The reference registered immediately, though I maintained neutral expression. Yes, I'm familiar with Mr. Reynolds and his organization. Our foundation's governance protocols prevent collaboration due to prior connections. Marguerite's subtle smile suggested she understood more than my diplomatic response conveyed. I see. Well, having met you, I'll certainly scrutinize that application. With particular attention to regulatory compliance, we value institutional integrity above client acquisition. The exchange represented something significant: professional respect, superseding potential manipulation, my reputation, carrying greater weight than James's attempted leveraging of past connection, the subtle acknowledgement of understood context, without explicit disclosure, reflected the financial world's discreet handling of delicate matters. That evening in my hotel suite, preparing notes for the conference's second day, I received a message from Eleanor containing a news article published just hours earlier. Finance executive James Reynolds donates 5 nailers to cancer research following diagnosis. The accompanying photo showed James at a philanthropy gala, Emily at his side in supportive posture, surrounded by medical foundation executives. Eleanor's message added simple observation: interesting timing, coinciding with regulatory scrutiny of Renaissance. Your influence on genuine philanthropic impact continues from unexpected directions. The assessment contained neither cynicism nor naivete, simply recognition that human motivation rarely emerges from single pure source. James's donation likely represented both genuine response to personal health crisis and strategic attempt at reputation management during regulatory challenges. The complexity reflected essential truth about human behavior: our capacity to simultaneously serve multiple agendas through single actions. What struck me most profoundly was my response to this information. Neither satisfaction at apparent karma nor skepticism about motivations, but simple acknowledgement of another human navigating life circumstances. According to established patterns, James remained fundamentally himself: strategic image, conscious, capable of both genuine feeling and calculated action. My ability to recognize these realities without emotional entanglement confirmed transformation complete. Returning to conference preparations, I experienced momentary appreciation for how thoroughly the journey initiated by Betrayal's discovery had reshaped my fundamental orientation toward life itself. The woman who had once abandoned professional identity to support her husband's ambitions now addressed international financial leaders as recognized authority. The foundation established as constructive channel for divorce settlement had evolved into influential institution changing thousands of lives. The cautious recovery from betrayal had transformed into confident engagement with life's full complexity. As Geneva's light sparkled beyond my window, I recognized with quiet certainty that my story would continue evolving through new chapters entirely unconnected to previous marriage or its dissolution. Professional achievements, relationship developments, perhaps even unexpected opportunities not yet visible on current horizon. The narrative had fully transcended its origin point, becoming something entirely new through consistent choices, aligned with authentic values rather than reactive emotion. This progression from victimhood through strategic recovery to genuine transcendence represented transformation's ultimate achievement, not absence of past experience from personal history, but integration of its lessons into wisdom supporting continued growth rather than limiting future possibility. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.